Okay, hello, my name is Delun Gibby and I am the Visitor Services Manager North, but otherwise known as the manager for Castell INH Village. So for those who don't know where that is, it is just North Pembrokeshire, on the road from Cardigan going towards Newport, and just, well, near to Nevin really. So the site was originally bought by Hugh Foster, who was an entrepreneur who was part of the founding members of the London Dungeon. So this entire idea of immersive learning, so going back to the past, being immersed in the past, smelling the past, tasting the past, all of that. And he wanted to bring some of that to West Wales. So he actually saw a newspaper clipping in London that basically was advertising Castell saying, do you want to own your own hill fort? And Hugh Foster was like, yes, I do. And he decided to buy the site. The idea that he originally had was to turn it into an Asterix the Gaul theme park. But it's a little bit different from that today. He put the application in and clearly they were like, maybe. But one of the main things he had to do was to do an archaeological investigation because they knew that there was something there, it was a scheduled monument. So lucky for him, Harold Mighton and his team of archaeologists were down in the area in Llawhaden, digging the settlements there at the time, and he invited them up to basically have a look at the site. And that started in a project that lasted nearly 30 years, well, more than 30 years really. They found that basically the site had never been properly ploughed and that the Iron Age layer was, well, quite near the top of the soil. And they found quite an amazing array of artifacts, including blue glass beads, an iron flesh hook, various types of various types of artifacts, and Harold Mighton will be publishing something about them soon. We also have some the more interesting artifacts in our guidebook as well, including a gaming board that they found. Anyway, over the 30 years then, so at the beginning in 1982, Hugh Foster decided that he wanted to reconstruct one of the roundhouses that they found. So they found the postals of, I think, of up to 32 roundhouses in total, but at any one time there would have been possibly up to 10 roundhouses up there at any one time. So he rebuilt the roundhouses on top of the original foundations, which makes the site really unique in that sense. We're the only site in the UK where the Iron Age village has been rebuilt right on top of the original foundations. So where you see the roundhouses today, that's where they would have been 2,000 years ago. And then in 1999, 2000, the Parks took over the site. Sadly, Hugh Foster passed away. So the main purpose of the site now is to interpret or tell the story of the Pembrokeshire and Welsh Iron Age to the public. And we use this past then to show how lessons from this past can inspire a greener future. So we do this mostly through costumed interpretation, and of course the visitor centre, the guidebook. Through our costumed interpretation, we do demonstrations of ancient crafts. We celebrate the ancient festivals such as Beltane and Samhain, or Calan Mai, Calan Gaeaf, and we do hands-on activities, and we just provide that immersive and memorable experience that people enjoy. We also welcome schools to the site, especially pre-COVID. We were very popular with schools. I think every single school in Pembrokeshire, Carmarthenshire and Ceredigion had visited us at least once. We also had schools from as far afield as Coed, Cardiff, Swansea, and we even had one residential English school that came to visit us quite often. We're also, back in 2014, we became the hub for a project called Origins. So the Castell site became like a tourist information centre for prehistoric Pembrokeshire, but mostly for sites in North Pembrokeshire. So places like Pentre Ifan, Cyrgau Cemmaes, Foldrigan, Carmania and so forth. And basically providing information about these amazing sites that most people didn't know about before, well, except for Pentre Ifan, everybody knows about that one. But places like Gorsfawr, and trying to encourage more people to visit these amazing sites. So just to say what we've got, Pentre Ifan on the left-hand side, Carreg Coetan Arthur underneath, which is in Newport, and underneath that we have Oel Garden, and I'm pretty sure Tomos might talk a bit more about that. But of course, you can see the 3 Bronze Age cairns in the middle, and then the Iron Age hill fort that has developed around it. We also, so as part of the Origins project, we also tried to encourage people to discover more about Welsh culture, the Welsh language, and about local businesses and communities in the area as well. At the moment, we're trying to develop Castell Henllys as a little hub for Welsh language and culture. We're hoping to reinstate quite soon our Disied y Dysgwyr sessions, which is like a coffee morning type thing for Welsh learners or Welsh speakers alike, and it's very informal. You come along, you have a cup of tea or a coffee, you go out to the veranda, and we can talk about birds and their Welsh names, or just practice Welsh in a really informal but fun manner, using songs, nursery rhymes, games, magazines, and we just let people, you can engage with us if you like and practice your Welsh, or if you just want to have a look at some Welsh magazines whilst sipping a cup of tea, then that is also something that is totally fine. We also worked with Mentor Iaith to deliver, well, Disied y Dysgwyr, but also during the main season in August, in 2019, we delivered 2 sessions where Mentor Iaith came in to teach Welsh to tourists, and then they had the chance then to go down to the shop with a cafe to practice what they learnt. The favourite one was Gai Paint o Gwrw, Gwelwch yn dda. That became very popular because we sell Bluestone Brewery at the cafe on site. So yes, we just try to provide people with that confidence and that entrance into the Welsh language in a really friendly and relaxed way, basically. One of the main challenges as well that we've been trying to address, especially back in 2019 and now again, now that we're starting to reopen, is seasonality and rurality. So we do just fine, as most businesses do in Pembrokeshire, between April and October. We want to try and extend the season into the winter as well. So one of the ideas that we had with the local Preseli community, the Preseli Heartlands community, sorry. So we decided that we were going to try and bring back the Mari Lwyd tradition to Pembrokeshire. So we decided to visit a few pubs in the area with our Mari Lwyd. For those of you who don't know what the Mari Lwyd tradition is, but basically from Halloween onwards in Old Wales, Victorian times, 1700s onwards, it was a wassailing tradition in the middle of winter with a Mari Lwyd, which is basically a horse's skull and who's decorated with Christmas baubles and ribbons, and you had white sheet all over you. And you would go from house to house singing a song called Dyma'n Dŵad. And basically then the people who were with the Mari Lwyd would sing into the house, and the people of the house then would have to sing back. And everything had to be in rhyme and all bardic and all that. And whoever would win this little rap battle, if you want, the people outside won, the Mari Lwyd group, they got to come into your house and drink all of your beer, all of your alcohol, and eat all of your food. And then if the people on the inside won, the Mari Lwyd would have to go on. Of course, by the end of the night, most people didn't want the Mari Lwyd group to come in because they would be too drunk and it would just end badly. But most of the time people enjoyed welcoming them in because it was frivolity and something to look forward to in the middle of winter. So we thought this fit in quite well in trying to address the season of the challenge of seasonality. So we went around all the different pubs and singing and just teaching people about this this ancient tradition, basically, and it was a lot of fun. So our main objectives on the site, so we're trying to develop Castell Henllys as the go-to prehistoric attraction in Wales. Yeah, so we want to educate the public not only about prehistory, but also about sustainability, conservation, the Welsh language and culture. Yes, we are a tourist attraction, but we want to try and continue to develop as a local hub as well, as well as contribute to the local economy and culture through partnership working with local businesses, charities and organisation. And I'm sure we'll be working with you guys at some point in the near future as well. So the current challenges that we're facing, the main one, of course, is COVID-19 and recovering from it and trying to adapt the way that we are engaging with the public on site. Seasonality is still possibly a problem, although last year we did see more people staying on for longer after October, well, until the lockdown came in. And then after that lifted, we did have a few people around in November. So in some way, the COVID-19 pandemic has forced people to have to stay within the country, and therefore it is, in a slight weird way, it is helping the local economy in that way. And then rurality also is still a challenge. But now we're also trying to adapt to a more digital audience, although that's going much better than I thought it was going to be, as we can see by this evening. So the way that we've been trying to deal with the all of the different COVID restrictions, we've had to try and do more things outside. Now, lucky for us, due to the nature of the site, it's mostly outdoors anyway. But of course, we have to consider social distancing, so we now have a booking system in place. So only 36 people can come per 3 hours. But what we have found is, because we have now got this booking system, we are making our experiences more bespoke. And although we've only got 36 people on the site for 3 hours, those 36 people then get a much better experience because we have more time to dedicate to each household, if that makes sense. We're also running there's more interest now in the outdoors, in nature, in looking to the past for an answer to the future. So we're running more bushcraft workshops, doing demonstrations such as fire starting, rope making, and again, ancient textiles and so forth. One of the main challenges that we have is that we pride ourselves as being a very accessible site. We have mobility scooters, and we used to have the Yeti as well, which is a 4x4, which we would ferry people up and down the Hillfort with. Of course, COVID-19 has put a stop to us being able to giving a lift. However, we've been very lucky. We've just received a grant to buy 2 more of these awesome 4x4 trampers, as modelled by our Roman here. And so we're hoping to address the problem of accessibility that COVID has now given us with these new trampers, basically. But we're hoping soon that restrictions will relax a bit more, so we can again provide lifts to people to go and enjoy the site. Our open-sided teepee, which is something that we've always had on site since 2014, has become very popular with the local community. So we're trying to support local community groups such as young farmers clubs, volunteer groups, Cilchmeithrin, which is like a Welsh language play group. And they get to then use the teepee for free as a way for us to try to support the local community. So if you guys need to use the teepee for anything, I'm just letting you know that it's there. So moving on now to experimental archaeology and archaeological work. So back in 2019, when I started, there were 2 roundhouses that needed work doing. It basically, we were starting from scratch again, because the roundhouses that had stood for nearly 32 years were coming to the end of their life, and they needed rebuilding as well. I think most of you took part in the redaubing and watling of these houses. If you want to, me and my colleague Liz Moore, back in March 2020, just as the lockdown came in, we were meant to be going to Berlin to present our documentation of the roundhouse reconstruction, the first one, the Cook House. And if you do want to see that presentation, it is on YouTube for you to see. Liz made a video, like a time lapse basically, of us reconstructing the Cook House. The Earthwatch then, or the meeting house, that was the next one to come down and go back up. So with that one, so with each one of these, Harold Myton came down with a team from the University of Liverpool this time, and they excavated these roundhouses to see what modern people have been leaving behind, and we'll be coming on to that now. And we've also done a reconstructing of the gateway, and whilst we were all home working under lockdown, my team had a go at various experimental archaeological projects. So this was the Earth Watch. As I said, everything had to come down, and once everything had come down to the post holes, Harold and his team came in to excavate for about 3 weeks, taking everything basically back to foundations again. And then we had T Brennan, who were a specialist team, to rebuild the frame of the roundhouse, and then teams of volunteers such as yourselves came in to wattle and of course daub this house. Luckily the meeting house had much lower walls, so the daubing went so much faster, and we also were taught a new technique of how to mix daub with T Bren. So I don't know how many of you helped out with the first roundhouse, the cookhouse, where we were mixing the daub with our feet, literally wellies into the daub, and it was back-breaking work, because we would then scoop everything into the wheelbarrow, and it was very, very hard, especially in the middle of February. Luckily this time the meeting house was rebuilt, I can't remember, I think it was June, July, something like that. But the new technique was putting the daub on a tap, folding the tap over the daub, and then dancing on it, and it just made things so much easier using the tap to fold the daub. And it was just amazing to learn a new skill, basically. So that went up quite quickly. With the excavations, they did find so much plastic within basically a 20-year layer of soil, going all the way back to the 1980s. I'm not sure if you saw the article that the BBC ran about it. One of the main things that Harold was quite happy to find was this massive plastic label from a lunchbox from 1998 of a Godzilla. But it did show us just how much we are having an impact on the strata of soil, so much so that archaeologists of the future will be able to say that this was the age, this was basically the plastic age. That is how much of an impact we are having on the earth. Sorry, I'm just going to have a drink of water. So we have put this into our new guidebook, and we will be interpreting this in our new interpretation area, and hoping this will highlight to people just the amount of impact that we are having on the planet and on the soil at the moment. So this is what the Earth Watch looked like by the end, and this in the past few months, beginning in April, we've also completely painted the inside as well. So if you fancy coming up to have a look at it, you're more than welcome to. As soon as those two houses were done, the smithy showed signs that it was completely decaying. So this is the smithy when it was built originally. And then this is what it looked like after we T Bren then finished the frame. And again, we had volunteers come in to do the wattle and the daubing. And this is what it looks like now. So we now have the cookhouse, the meeting house, and the smithy all completely new. So it'll be interesting to see now how long these ones will last, because each time we rebuild a house, we take forward new ideas, we take forward lessons that we've learned, mistakes that we've made in the past, that we know not to do it again. So hopefully these ones will last a bit longer. So just before lockdown last year, we started reconstructing the gateway. So when they originally excavated it back in the 1980s, well, towards the end of the 1980s, so you can see these massive post holes. So the gateway of Castell is quite unique in that it has two pairs of guard chambers. If you can just see them here on you can see one just on the right picture. So basically they're like semicircles. 4 sets of semicircles that it makes up a gateway, and these massive posts then, Harold thinks that there might have been a gatehouse, but it could also be just extremely large posts. But because the post holes were so big, he does think that it would have had quite a big gatehouse on top, and this would have made quite a big statement in the landscape. So we've rebuilt it. I don't know when you've visited Castell last, or if you've never been. But before, we had wood basically marking out where these guard chambers were, and they were decaying quite horribly. So now we've put it all back using dry stone walling. And Di Reynolds finished the gates going into the gateway yesterday, and he sent me these pictures today. So it's looking very nice, and it's looking far more accurate. So last year then, when the team had to work from home, they all had their own little projects to get on with. So we have Liz Roach, who is our resident textiles specialist. She dyed some wool. She actually set up a loom at home. She got on with a lot of spinning and dyeing and weaving. And she also made a video for us as well. John then, who's like our bushcraft specialist and willing to give anything a go, he made us a net. But we wanted to find out if it was plausible for us to demonstrate smelting on site, and how much of an effort it would be for us to do this workshop to show children and adults like how smelting was done, but using aluminium cans, so we can show them the process of recycling. And although he managed to make some brilliant aluminium ingots using aluminium cans, it was a very long and laborious task, so it wasn't really realistic for us to do it with the public. But it was quite interesting because he did use some replica Iron Age crucibles and tools in order to make these ingots. And then Kat then, who is our resident cook, she experimented with some Iron Age recipes and created some interesting dishes. If you want to see more of these, we have put them up on our Facebook page, some of the videos. It was an interesting time because obviously more and more things were becoming digital, so we tried to keep up with it as much as possible. So that brings me to the end of the presentation, and if anybody's got any questions, I think you can feel free to ask at the end of Tomos's presentation, I think. I hope you all enjoyed.
So I feel like I could possibly do a mini talk based on what Delun has just done, and it's great. She's sort of, it was really interesting to hear about all the activities and sort of taking that micro look at the national park. Although thanks Delun for highlighting some of those prehistoric sites, and you're quite fortunate because you've got two archaeologists here this evening. So if I don't know the answers, I'm sure Delun hopefully will help me out. So I just want to sort of say, and I say this quite often when Delun is around, I just want to thank her. She made the job of starting work with the national park much easier. And what I'm going to sort of focus on is sort of the macro level, the archaeological activities that we try to do to sort of safeguard, as I've put there in my title, the archaeology. But really interesting stuff coming through from Delun's talk. COVID-19 has had a massive impact, and I don't know if you read it last year, but I did an article for the Friends back in autumn, I think, and that was all around how we had to find new ways of engaging. So it's great to see the way that Castell has managed to adapt, and that goes down to the brilliant team there. Just going on to the point about the article by Harold Mighton, one of the things we're hoping to do this year for the Archaeology Day, if any of you have been to that previously, we're hoping possibly he can do a talk about the plastic and that impact and its link to climate change. The other thing that was really good that Delun picked up on, because I'm going to do something slightly different, is she highlighted the intangible cultural heritage. So sort of those customs, rituals and traditions. And it was really nice to see Mary Lloyd there, although a bit creepy with those, it looked like she had those red eyes. So it looked like a possessed dead horse, but yeah, really, really nice to see some of those practices. So what I'm going to focus on is the macro level, sort of go through how the national park fits into looking after archaeology, a bit about our activities, and then like was mentioned at the beginning, some case studies, and then I'll link them to the more recent research around Stonehenge. So I'm not going to tread on Mike's toes, because obviously he's the one who does that research. I'm going to look at it from the point of view of how can we manage the attention that that research will be getting from visitors. So I just wanted to highlight, and obviously as you're friends with the National Park, you'd probably be quite au fait, but I just wanted to kind of tie in how cultural heritage fits in within national parks. So just as you can see there, the image of the 15 national parks as they stand, although more recently, potentially we'll have a fourth one in Wales, which could be really interesting to see. So essentially, all national parks have a duty in relation to their cultural heritage. And so that has two purposes. So the first is we're there to conserve and enhance cultural heritage. So that's all about safeguarding and improving the condition of cultural heritage. And then the second one is then about creating accessibility for people to enjoy the cultural heritage of national parks, like this event. And then the final one is duty. We're supposed to try and foster, you know, local economies, social well-being of communities, and hopefully through some of our activities, we succeed in doing that in cultural heritage. So just sort of for some of you, I've noticed some of you might have been to my talks before, but I just wanted to give a very brief definition of archaeology, and possibly Delun will have a different perspective on this, so it'd be interesting to see if she's got something to say after the talk. But essentially, archaeology is about the study of human traces from past activities. So I've worded that very carefully because actually people who are still alive today could still be from a period that we study in archaeology. So for example, World War II features, or even more recently, Cold War, for example. And in terms of the archaeological sites, so what do we mean by that? Well, these are the places where people have left those traces of their lives and activities in the past. So that's what you're seeing in the landscape when people are referring to archaeological sites. And one thing I didn't mention, I was going to, but I can see on my list here when Delun was doing talk, and so she mentioned Gorsfawr. So the background image that you're seeing on screen, which probably many of you will know, is the Bronze Age stone circle known as Gorsfawr. So there it is. You've got that nice image in the background. So in terms of evidence in archaeology, now I've listed some of them, but as I'd like to point out, there'll be practically the evidence is anything associated with humans and or their activities. So that can include things like pottery, biological and paleo-environmental remains, lithics, metals, structures, buildings, burials, clothing. You know, you can see the list there on the screen, but essentially, you know, it's anything to do with human activity or helps us understand human activity in the past. And in terms of the broader archaeological period for archaeology in general across the globe, it's dated through several million years, and generally the continent of Africa is regarded as the sort of initial place where humans evolved and begin to use tools. And so going back to that point I made about Delun, I brought these really nice bits around the intangible cultural heritage. So archaeology, so my focus is primarily around those tangible cultural heritage. It's almost like I've taken that easy route. You've got that physical stuff there so you can study it, whereas the intangible is more around customs, rituals and traditions. So it's the physical element of past activities that I'm, or archaeology is concerned with. So in terms of archaeology in the Pembrokeshire coast, so probably most of you as friends will be aware, so this is the national park, which is the areas in green on this map, and you can see its context in the wider Welsh landscape. So I just want to show you. So this is the records as we have it for archaeological and historical features or sites, and in just the Pembrokeshire coast area, there's over 11,000 of these records. And one I did a talk recently, and it was a very good point at the end. People thought that there was nothing in the area of Pembrokeshire more broadly, but actually what we've done here is we've filtered down. So this is actually just filtered to the national park area. But if we actually looked at the records for the wider landscape, you'd actually find that there would be archaeological and historical records dotted across the landscape. But this is, just so you know, it's just filtered, but it's just to give you that perspective of how rich heritage is in our landscape and actually more broadly in the, I suppose you could say, Wales or UK landscape. So what does it include? Well, you've got those archaeological sites, historical buildings. It can include the historical and cultural landscapes. So these can be those field boundaries or field systems. Some of them will be artifacts, finds and discoveries. And also you've got things like wrecks, and there will be other features that I've forgotten to mention. And for the national park area, these features will date back to the Upper Paleolithic. So that's the later phase of the Old Stone Age. So we have some sites that are dated, they're over 30,000 years old, and those are the cave sites that you find in Pembrokeshire. And then some of the features will be right up to more recent times. So like I mentioned, World War II features, and if you're walking along the coast path, you'll notice there are many of these World War II defences or airfields, so quite rich in that period as well. So this one, unfortunately, I did look for a colour to highlight, but this is all around the scheduled monuments in the national park. And I don't know how clear it is on your screen, but this, you should be able to see these little dots of yellow on the screen. So these represent the scheduled monuments in the national park. So what's the scheduled monuments? Well, first of all, there's 300 of them, almost 300, I should say, not that there is, there's almost 300. And they're essentially archaeological sites and features that have been designated as of national importance. And that's not to say that the other features are not important, but these are the ones that have been assessed and they've met the criteria. And scheduled monuments are primarily the responsibility of CADU, which is the Welsh Government's Historic Environment Agency. And in terms of types, so similar to the records I mentioned before, the records include the sites that are not scheduled and also scheduled, but essentially includes cave sites, forts, cairns, so some of those features that Delun mentioned. So I'll show you some images, and again, just highlighting that the scheduled monuments date back to that Upper Paleolithic period, and again, to the more recent, so for example, some of those World War II features will be protected in law. So just some examples, and Delun mentioned I would highlight some of them. So we've got burial chambers, and of course, Delun highlighted Pentrefan, but this is another one called Carrick Sampson. We've got those medieval castles, so Carew Castle, which is actually, interestingly, so one of the other centres. So that centre is also managed and has staff who will do sort of similar things to Castell Henllys, but will focus on a slightly different period. And we've got cathedrals and those religious sites from the Middle Ages, although it's interesting to note that many of these structures, like the cathedral, will have gone through phases of constructions. And I'm not a building conservationist or a specialist on buildings, but the different types of windows, the shapes of the arches will represent a particular period in time. But this particular, the cathedral will have gone through several phases right up until the very recent times. And then you've got other medieval Christian sites like St. Govan's Chapel, which is a fantastic site. So this is Hoyle's Mouth. So it's one of those sites that it has the oldest date in Pembrokeshire. It's dated to that Upper Paleolithic period. We've got some industrial sites. So the quarry Porthcain, which would have taken slate from the quarry, which is just above this port that you can see here. Got some standing stones, which would have been, and I'm sure, I think Delun is probably more of an expert on prehistory, so she'll probably correct me if I'm wrong, but these were markers in the landscape, and there's various interpretations around their purpose. But here's a standing stone from that prehistoric era. And then we've got those World War II features. So the airfield just outside St. David's. Interesting enough, this is one of those features which I would say is very important, but it actually doesn't have the designation of a scheduled monument. And then finally, the monument that Delun highlighted, which was Foel Drygan. And you can see there the ramparts, or those defensive structures around the site. And then you've got the three cairns on the top, which is interpreted to be Bronze Age, but again, they could be more recent and could be contemporary with the Iron Age structure. So what I want to show now, so you've seen a few examples there, and we've talked about, you know, how rich the archaeological heritage is. So it's just highlighting some of these activities. And I have to say, Delun was fundamental really, because she developed a lot of these already, and then I just kind of built on them. So again, really grateful to her work in this area. But essentially, these will all fit in and will contribute to our purpose. So again, going back to safeguarding archaeology, but also creating opportunities and then fostering you know, the social and economic well-being by providing opportunities that maybe give people training, or maybe help people's health and well-being. So we've got things like events and activities like this talk, and of course our notable Archaeology Day, which happens in November. We work with a number of partners to help further our work. We provide some information, so interpretation. We have community projects, for example, the Preseli Heartlands, so working with communities. We also deal with planning, of course, as a planning authority, but we've also got other areas as well. And a lot of these different aspects, they will kind of overlap. So sometimes it's very difficult to untangle them, but these are the sort of the key areas that I could pick out that we're involved in. So what I want to do now is just give you two case studies that relate to our activities, and these will sort of overlap with those. There'll be different elements of those activities that I just showed you that will come into these. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of tie them in and how they will contribute to our work in terms of the recent research by Mike on the origins of some of the Stonehenge features from the Preseli area. So the first one is Heritage Watch Scheme. And actually, Delun actually developed this before I started, and I've tried to build on that and tried to keep the momentum going with this. So Heritage Watch was established in 2018, and it was after some vandalism. Well, some people might not call it vandalism, I would, in Pembrokeshire and also some other sites. So working with the police, Delun set up this scheme to try and address heritage crime at protected sites. So established then. So it's all about safeguarding sites, so protecting them. It's also about getting people to report incidents, and that will then give us a better picture of what's happening and helps us allocate resources accordingly. Providing training on what is heritage crime and what to do in terms of how to report. Creating stronger partnerships, so working with the police. We're also working with CADU, who's responsible for monuments, scheduled monuments, for example, or working with the archaeological trusts, and then carrying out some work where we can, and then also addressing those issues. So you might carry out the work and you might, you know, deal with an issue, but then also getting to the root cause. So for example, if there's antisocial behavior associated with damage, for example, graffiti, it's about tackling those issues. So sometimes it's really complex. And then also it's about raising the awareness and increasing the profile of heritage crime as an issue. So in terms of what have we actually done since the scheme was established? Well, a Facebook page was set up, and I'll give you the link at the end of the talk for that. And also more recently, we set up a page on the National Park website, and that gives you information about heritage crime. And also it gives you information on how to report and how to get involved in helping us look after these sites. Training's been delivered, both in person and also because of COVID, we delivered some training virtually last year, and that's both to the police, and we've done that working with CADU and also the archaeological trusts. So that's ongoing, so we will probably be doing further training in the near future. Patrols were established, so these were to those sites that were vulnerable, and that's with National Park colleagues, but also police. And that is, again, something that's ongoing, and we'll also target certain times when we know there's likely to be an issue. So a reporting mechanism has been established, and a number of reports have increased as a result. And that's something that we've seen improve both in the National Park with colleagues, but also the police have a better understanding, but also we're getting the public to report issues as well, which is really good. And then the other thing that we've been doing is we've been highlighting these issues through press releases. So you'll see that this issue has featured in the media. And then again, going back to one of the points I made earlier, carrying out some remedial work. So where there's been graffiti, we've tried to address those issues by removing the graffiti, or where there was, for example, Pembrokeshire, remedial work was done to remove the graffiti on that site. And again, partnerships. So as a result of this scheme, it has strengthened, and also we've developed those contacts with the local policing teams, who are crucial because they know their areas, and they're invaluable. I mean, sometimes I will contact them about an issue with an area, and they'll very quickly go and visit, or they'll investigate. So it's really good, really important to have that. And also the fact that they have the training also helps, because then they're aware of the importance of addressing the issues. So I just wanted to highlight some of those things as snippets. So this is our webpage on our website about the Heritage Watch scheme. The first one, sorry, was Facebook. I was getting confused then. The second one is just a snippet of our webpage. This is virtual training we did for Pan Wales. So it was the 3 of the 4 police forces. We had CADU there, Historic England, and this was around training police officers across Wales about heritage crime. And we had, I think we had over 50 police officers or PCSOs from across Wales, which was really positive. This is one of our training. This was the last event we did physically last year, and this is us visiting Bedd Morris upon Carningley Common. So what we've got here is we've got some of the local policing teams, we've got the lead for heritage crime, we've got our rangers, we've got the CADU inspector, and also myself there. So that was really good. And this is one of our PCSOs who regularly goes out and patrols for us. And then these are some of the publicity that we've had as a result of the scheme. So this is some graffiti down in Pembroke Dock, which is just outside the National Park. And again, highlighting about some of the vandalism and tying back to the issues we have at Pembrokeshire. And we've even featured in a radio, BBC Radio Wales. This was actually just before COVID hit. And we actually were supposed to be on TV, but unfortunately it was dropped because of COVID, unfortunately. So we're getting that coverage. The second one I want to highlight very quickly is something we've developed in the last year. And we developed it during COVID, which was a bit of a challenge, but it's about monitoring scheduled monuments. And interestingly, some of those in the audience actually are some of our volunteers. So it'll be nice if they've got any perspective on how things have gone so far, if they do want to give an input on that. But essentially, this is a scheme where we have heritage volunteers, and they visit accessible or publicly accessible scheduled monuments, and then they submit information and we assess that, and then depending on the issues, we then will put some recommended actions in place. Now, the development is still ongoing, but I'll show you where we're up to. But these are the stages. So database established on scheduled monuments in the national park. So as I mentioned, there's just under 300 in total, but there's about, I think it's about half that are publicly accessible. So we're looking at about 50% of all scheduled monuments. And then the next step is then recruiting and training volunteers to visit and assess scheduled monuments. So look out for those issues, for example, heritage crime. So then it's all about allocating some of those scheduled monuments to volunteers, and that will probably be largely due to where people live. So we try to not make it too far from home for people. And then it's a case of volunteers then visiting scheduled monuments, collecting that information, and then submitting it electronically. And then what happens then is, although this is still a work in progress, the information is then assessed by myself, and then recommended actions are put in place. And finally, when we're really happy is when the actions are implemented to address those issues. So I'll just go over what we've done so far. So the database was established last year. We delivered some virtual sessions to recruit volunteers. 16 were recruited and trained in the last financial year. And since then, since about October when visits started, or September, October, we've had over 100 visits and forms have been submitted. And assessment is currently ongoing. So I've assessed a number of these, but it will take time. But once we've done that first round of assessment, hopefully then it will be a little bit more manageable. So it's a bit of a challenge with everything else at the moment. And interestingly, really useful stuff so far. Issues have been identified on some of those sites, but others are in good state. So it's just a case of routine monitoring. But again, some will need attention. And so the next step, once we've looked at all the monuments, all the assessments that come in, we will then look at implementing some of those recommendations or speaking to partners when potentially to landowners of those sites. So the last bit, I sort of wanted to tie in with those two case studies, so Heritage Watch and monitoring those scheduled monuments by heritage volunteers. And this is a lovely photo from one of those sites, Wynmawn, taken by Sophie Jenkins, which some of you might know. So some of the implications of that recent coverage. So it seems to have been a very popular documentary. Some of the things we picked up so far is there are issues with accessibility to some of those sites. They potentially could be a threat to the integrity of sites. For example, people damaging monuments, not realizing they're scheduled, or also these sites also have, in many cases, triple SI designation. So there's those natural designations. So the pressure of people visiting those sites, local infrastructure, and the impact on communities, and people adhering to countryside code, because sometimes people they're just not aware of what they're supposed to do, what they're allowed to do. So how does Heritage Watch and the role of monitoring fit into this? Well, some of our heritage volunteers will actually be visiting some of those key sites that featured in the documentary, just to keep an eye on those sites. We'll also be doing some Heritage Watch patrols, so the police, myself and the rangers, so we'll do that around key times. Again, reporting issues if that happens, and we'll probably be doing some kind of press release fairly soon, just to highlight people around what to do in terms of where to park and what to do when you're visiting those sites. So you know, the two different case studies are just some elements of, you know, how they can contribute to safeguarding those sites. So that's it from me. The last part was I was just going to highlight. So if you're not already on the mailing list, we do have an archaeology one, and the link is just there. And that will basically ask you to select different options that you're interested in. And then if there's anything related to that, I'll then send out an email about that. The other thing to highlight is the Heritage Watch, which is in Welsh. For some reason, I've typed it in Welsh here. So the last point is a Heritage Watching, but I can see it's not, doesn't quite fit on the screen. But if you go onto our website and you search archaeology, all these different ones will come up. So thanks for listening. So I'll stop sharing, and then you're free to ask questions.
Ian, you have your hand up. You're free to unmute.
Unmute. There you go. Right, to both the speakers, thank you very much indeed. That was exactly what I expected, full of really interesting stuff. And I've got plenty of questions here, but I don't want to hog the floor. But allow me to get the questions going. With one for Delun, if I may. Delun, do you predict that the archaeological journey, if you like, which is the site at Castell, Henllys, has it got an end to it, or do you think you'll always continue to find new archaeological interest there? You know, from the way you were talking, there's an awful lot of emphasis on the education program and the other supporting roles at Castell, Henllys. But in terms of the pure archaeology and the journey, if you like, through the history of that site, do you think there is an end point that you'll get to eventually?
It's a really good question. What we're continuing to do at the moment is through experimental archaeology. So we have stopped in terms of excavation as far as we can go, just because Harold has dug all of the inside of the really interesting bits then. But saying that, we also have bogs on site. So down at the bottom of the hill fort, we've got really boggy areas, and I'm sure there are really interesting organic artifacts to be found there. But for something like that, you would need quite a lot of money one day to do it. So yeah, the artifacts will still be there, like in 2000. Well, how many? It'll be there forever, basically, unless something really horrible happens. So it's just a matter of time and money, basically. There are plenty of other areas that can be investigated in the future. I mean, we are managing the site because areas of it are still scheduled, including the ramparts, and if you ever walk up most of the part of the hill where the trees are on, that's all scheduled. And now we've started a management plan on how to manage the trees and wind throw, because in recent years, with all the increase in storms, that has basically increased the number of trees that are thrown down by the wind each year. We haven't had the problem this year yet, but with that, the root plates come up, and then usually I have to clamber up there to have a look at and make sure that nothing has come to light. Sometimes a part of me is like, yes, I really hope I find something. But most of the time, it's just, to be honest, it's mostly a rocky face, really, where they scarped it. So there isn't that much artifacts remaining in that area as of yet. But who knows? There might be other things to find. But so there is that aspect, the actual Iron Age artifacts, and I'm sure there might be older things and as well post-medieval artifacts as well. And the river actually puts up quite a lot of post-medieval pottery. Yeah, we usually have children that have been paddling the river bring things in and be like, oh, what's this? So we do have a bit of that on site as well. And of course now we've got plastic, and like as Tomos says, like archaeology is basically what we leave behind, and that includes all the rubbish that we leave behind as well. So yeah, archaeology is constantly going to be present at Castell Henllys.
Great, thank you very much. Good. Ian, have you got any questions there?
Nobody else has raised their hands or put any chats in. I've got one. Thomas, what are there any big digs coming up in the next couple of years?
Yes, so excitingly, obviously COVID meant there was no excavations last year, which was very, very sad to hear. But this year we've actually got St. Patrick's Chapel, which is happening the start of June, and it was supposed to happen last year, But what they've decided to do is do a 6-week excavation. So it's quite a mammoth excavation. Usually it's about 3 weeks. So that one's taking place. I did put a call out for volunteers, but I've found out today that they're completely oversubscribed, and they've even got people on the waiting list to excavate. But it is worth, if you're interested, there are other excavations coming up soon. So I'm aware that Portherau, which is in Ninewells, that one is happening straight after St Patrick's Chapel, because it's being led by the Dyfed Archaeological Trust. And then later on, so in the autumn or the end of the summer, Mike will be coming back to do further research, further excavation, hopefully. That's the plan. And then that will probably be for about 3 weeks. And then we've got, we're also working with Cherish, if you're aware of that project, and they're hoping to do an excavation in the autumn on a promontory fort just outside St David's called Castell. So yeah, so there's plenty of excavations happening. And, you know, if I can, going back to the Royal Community Archaeology, and I'm sure Delun did exactly the same, is we try to provide those opportunities for people. So when they come up, and if there are spaces, I will put them out and publicise them.
I saw a couple of posts the other day from Toby Driver, one of which was a link to something which I think happened a few years ago now. Was it digging a pipeline, and they found an ancient wooden trough? Is that inside or outside the park? I didn't quite work out where that was.
I'm not sure. I have heard someone mentioned this recently. I'm not sure, unless Delun has heard anything. I'm not aware. But there is, if you're interested in Toby Driver's work, they did an amazing virtual conference yesterday, the Cherish, and it was online. And it's amazing how we've developed, because they had exhibition rooms, and you could join certain chats and things. So it is worth having a look online. I think if you go on Cherish's website, I think via the Royal Commission, you'll come across information about the conference. But I think that's going to be available on YouTube, I think. But it's definitely worth looking at. And that's all around climate change, coastal erosion, which obviously is an important topic for us here in Pembrokeshire.
I've got my hand up.
I can see it.
Or maybe I just go straight in. There's a couple of questions really. That map that you showed, basically just the national park area, but I get the concentration of the historic records. Is that typical or reasonably typical of a wider context across Britain? Or are we actually living in an area which is in its own way quite unique because of that concentration? And the second question is, if I can just throw this in as well, coming back to One Mauer, to me it seems like Mike Parker Pearson's theories are pretty seismic, and I just wonder how they are generally received across the archaeological world, not amongst the lay people like ourselves who read the articles and watch the documentaries, but in there's the halls of academia, if you like, in the archaeological world. How is it being received?
Okay, well, on the first one, yeah, so like I mentioned in the talk, I intentionally filtered to the Pembrokeshire coast, but basically Britain is rich in archaeology across the landscape, so that is distorted, but of course, the national parks are designated for particular reasons. So obviously ours is for the spectacular coastline, and some of the archaeology down here is of course, it goes without saying, is incredible. But no, you'll if I had not filtered, and in fact, if I got the data sets for the whole of Wales, you would find that the whole area. But it's worth bearing in mind. So there's over 11,000 records, but some of those records will relate to the same site. Some of them are spot finds, so it might be a metal detector has discovered an object. So some of them will be really tiny, and others will be really large. So and some of them will be, like I mentioned, duplicates. So it might be that somebody's done, there's 10 research papers on a particular site. Yeah. And then on the second one, it's difficult for me to comment on the archaeological world more broadly, as obviously I don't work within the academic sphere, but from my perspective, it's a really interesting idea, but I think if I was to give my view on it, I think there's still research to be done, and just to see how that develops, I think. So it's difficult to know what other people's views are on it, but it is nice to know that further research is being done on the interpretation around Wine Mound.
And we've had a question on chat from Bernadette. Can you park at and walk around Wine Mound?
So you can. So just by one of the gates near the cattle grid, you can sort of park at the side of the road, and then you can walk up to the site. The important thing to highlight, so this is one of the issues we've been having, is people have been visiting and then leaving gates open, and then stock has ended up on the road, or people have parked and then it's blocking the road, so it's causing an obstruction. We are looking at developing routes from other places so people can walk to the site first. So the one that comes to mind is we are discussing with the Brynberian Centre about potentially doing walks. And you can actually walk from that site up to Wine Mound, but you can also walk to Craig Rosabellin as well, which is one of the quarry sites. In fact, one of the issues we have at Craig Rosabellin, and this is one of the reasons we want to do a press release, is people are parking next to the gate to the site, and it's basically a passing place, whereas further up we have an actual designated parking area. So really it's just about what we want to do is just highlight some of the, what people should do if they're visiting. So hopefully that answers the question on Wine Mound.
That's great. Ian, are there any more?
I haven't seen any more. If anybody else would like to unmute and shout out, please do.
Okay. Last chance, because I'm going to call this to a halt in a moment.
Can I just say, as chairman, a big thank you, first of all, to the speakers for a very interesting presentation, but also to all of you for coming along to take part. So I think it's been a very, very useful evening.
Yeah, thanks very much, Steve. Yeah, I'd just like to add to that. I think what really brings these events alive is it's always easy to read these articles in the newspaper or online or whatever. But when you actually see the faces behind a lot of this work, it helps to bring it alive. And then, as I said right at the beginning, and it's been borne out tonight, the enthusiasm of the guys and girls who are leading these things is really encouraging. Can I also just say to everybody that I will get from Tomos and from Delun all the references that they've been talking about tonight, and I'll make sure that I put them all into our Friends News update, which is coming out towards the end of May. So if you're worried that you didn't have the references or you didn't write them down in time, don't worry. You'll have a look at the FNU when it comes out towards the end of May, and they'll all be in there.